Did you know that thanks to the advances in neuroscience and technology in the last few years, today we have a much better understanding of musicians' focal dystonia and what exactly happens in our brain when we suffer from this condition? If you didn't know that, I'll tell you about it right now. Hello, my name is Walter Silva. I'm a guitarist and composer, and I got fully recovered from musicians' focal dystonia. So welcome to my channel, Dystonia Focal del Guitarrista. Thanks to neurophysiological and functional neuroimaging studies done in musicians with focal dystonia, it was observed that there are alterations in the sensory information processing, dysfunction in the sensory motor integration, deficiency in cortical and subcortical inhibitory circuits, and also an increased excitability of the motor cortex. I know all these terms may sound very technical and difficult to understand, but I'll try to explain them very easily. But before, I'd like to emphasize a concept. Based on my own recovery, as well as that of other musicians who have followed my recovery program, I've observed that all these alterations are closely related to proprioception and the emotional factor. In this video, I'm going to focus on proprioception, and I'll talk about the emotional factor in my next video. Now let's analyze the first alteration, which is a deficiency in the sensory information processing. Although we are talking about a musician's pathology, this is not about the auditory sense, but about proprioception. If you don't know what proprioception is, I'm going to explain it to you in a very simple way. If you're a musician who's used to play live and amplified, you know very well that if you don't have a good monitor level on a stage and you can't hear very well the sound from your instrument and all its nuances, it will directly affect your performance and the musical results will be deficient. Well, the same happens with the internal sensations from our body. That is, with the sensory information from our muscles, ligaments, and tendons. That is proprioception. And how does this happen? Well, thanks to the sensors we have in our muscles, ligaments, and tendons. And the hand particularly has uncountable sensory receptors which gather all the necessary information to describe the position and displacement of each segment of the hands in the space. So basically, the proprioceptors provide us with the necessary information to coordinate our movements and to apply the necessary degree of muscle tension at all times. And this is a constant feedback process. But you know what? Incredibly, most people have quite poor proprioception and consequently poor body function. And musicians are no exception. When internal perceptions are imprecise and escape our awareness, the musical results are worse. And despite their lack of effectiveness, they give us a false sense of security. I'll give you an example. I frequently see many guitarists extending their pinky finger of their fretboard hand or the plucking hand like this. And this hyperextension of the pinky finger is because they're compensating a lack of strength or independence in the other fingers. And that's not good. But what happens when you ask them to relax the pinky finger? They usually respond, I can't. So the other question is, why does this happen? Well, because we easily get used to good and bad habits. Do you remember the fable of the boiling frog? That if you put the frog in pot filled with tepid water and you gradually heat it, the frog will remain in the water until it boils to death, right? Well, something similar happens with musicians who gradually become accustomed to using excessive force to step on the strings or to pluck them, and they end up considering the sensations related to that specific action as normal and adequate. So let's say that they take it for granted that things are like this just because nobody has ever told them anything about it, or they have never considered it. And it seems that the skill in our instrument is something that is a shift through force and automatic repetition. So our muscle receptors slowly and gradually adjust to high levels of muscle activation. We must bear in mind that these mechanoreceptors convert the physical stimulus of a muscle tension into a specific nerve signal. They're just transducers. They're like a guitar pickup, which converts the vibration from the strings into an electrical signal. Well, this is the same. So let's say that high levels of muscle activation will cause high levels of cortical arousal or excitation, and vice versa. That's why we have to be very careful about obsessively practicing and crushing our muscles and tendons, trying to reach high speeds and great sound using excessive force and tension, because this can lead to an overload of the central nervous system. So I think this is a good explanation of that increased excitability of the motor cortex. In normal conditions, the activation of the motor cortex triggers a flow of sensory stimuli that come from the areas in motion, but this begins even before the motion starts. For example, in a series of studies in healthy subjects and patients with focal dystonia, it was observed that in healthy subjects, the somatosensory cortex was less sensitive to sensory stimuli in a preparatory phase at the beginning of motion. But in patients with focal dystonia, sensitivity in that previous phase was much higher. This explains why we start to feel the contraction or the symptom before we move the finger. And I'm sure this sounds familiar to you because it's a very particular sensation I felt myself. And it's also important to bear in mind that there is a targeting mechanism for cortical motor activity. That means that that activity is facilitated in the muscles that receive sensory stimuli, and on the other hand is inhibited in the non-involved muscles. In other words, we have circuits in our brain that say move to certain muscles and other circuits that say stop to other muscles. But what happens in musicians with focal dystonia? Well, it happens that they have the same facilitation of response to the stimulus, both in muscles involved and in those that are not. Let's say that the circuits that facilitate movement are too excited and those that inhibit it are too little excited. If what I said before explained the increased excitability of the motor cortex, which was the fourth alteration, this explains the third alteration, which is a deficiency in the cortical and subcortical inhibitory circuits. This lack of distinction between stimuli from different muscles in a specific area of our body, such as the hand, is consistent with the alterations observed in the areas of sensory cortical representation. And that's just the map of our body in the brain. That means that the representation of the fingers of the hand in our somatosensory cortex is altered. In other words, it's blurred. This representation of the body in our somatosensory cortex is what Feldenkrais has called self-image. For this reason, based on scientific evidence, my recovery program consists of remapping the self-image. And this is achieved through proprioception and awareness through movement. But together with this work, we need to create a deep state of presence and observation. And we need to become observers, a passive observer, without judging the symptoms and without judging ourselves. And this is the part of the program I call emotional cleansing. Finally, I want to highlight an important concept. Musicians' focal dystonia keeps us in a loop of repetition of the symptom. And this is related to a wrong information, what in turn is the result of a poor proprioception. If you want to break the loop, first you must deactivate the symptom, and for that you need a strategy. If you want to know more about my recovery program, I invite you to visit my website, dystoniadelguitarrista.com. And if you like this video, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and see you in my next video.